I'm starting the recording.
Okay, Steve, do you want to lead us in the prayer?
I sure do. Baruch atah
Atah
Adonai
Adonai,
Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lazot Torah.
Torah.
Blessed are you,
Adonai,
Adonai,
our God,
ruler of
of
the
the
world,
world,
who
who
has
has
sanctified us with
sanctified us with your
commandments
commandments
and
and
commanded us to engage in the words of the
engage in
Torah.
the
Amen. Couple things. First, make sure if you are wanting to speak, raise your hand, and let's be courteous of others, and let's try to stay on subject or topic, because I know that can be a challenge. So, Rabbi, it's all yours.
Okay, good morning. We are on page 29, Perek Bet, Origins of the Pesach Celebration. Is that correct, Steve?
Yep, that is correct.
Okay, and if you look on page 29, you'll see a Passover plate. And so this morning we airmailed out to everyone a full Passover dinner, which should be at your front door right now.
All right.
So we're going to take a 3-minute break so you can bring it in and unpack it.
From your lips to God's ears.
Yeah.
And if
That'd be a
you
miracle.
and if you don't believe me, then just leave it at the door and somebody, one of the porch pirates, I'm sure will grab it, sooner rather than later.
Jeez.
So we have in the Torah, as we know from all the Torah study we've been doing, the Torah does not include comprehensive, encyclopedic discussions about topics, whether it be Jewish holidays or specific issues such as abortion or capital punishment or whatever. You can't just turn to a part of the Torah and say chapter 14 is going to discuss everything that we think about whatever topic. So there's little references here and there, sometimes more than others. And sometimes there's extensive discussions, but you have to piece it all together. And even then, it's very partial. Okay, I'm not saying anything that's controversial or shocking. And so today we're talking about Passover. Passover is one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals. So the 3 pilgrimage festivals are mentioned in the Torah, which is not true for everything, right? So, for example, Hanukkah, not mentioned in the Torah at all. Purim, not mentioned in the Torah at all. And other topics that we could list. Abortion, not mentioned in the Torah at all. Okay, but Passover and the other 2 pilgrimage festivals are mentioned. And that's why we're going to look at it on this in this portion and see what it says about it. But as you can expect, it's going to be very rudimentary. This is material from the very beginnings of, or relatively early in Judaism, maybe not the very beginning, but early-ish. And and so it's certainly not going to be everything that we know about Passover. It's going to be much more basic information. Some of it may have been changed. Some of it may not be fully developed or completely understandable, etc. Okay? Any complaints or objections on that point? Okay, then the point number 3 is that the holiday of Passover, as we understand it, is going to be quite different than the biblical holiday, and this is due to a number of reasons. But one of the big ones is there's no temple. So if there was a temple, then you're observing Passover in that context. So there's a Passover sacrifice, for example, or more than one. So and as I said, those 3 holidays are called the what?
Pilgrimage festivals.
Right, pilgrimage festivals, which means you have to do
Make a pilgrimage.
exactly, exactly. Thank you, Evelyn. So, a pilgrimage festival will require you to make a pilgrimage. And where do you make a pilgrimage to?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
Okay. And here too, so that's why I corrected myself and said it's an earlier stage, not the earliest stage, because in the earliest stage there was no central temple. There were numerous Jewish temples. And so it's only after the people in Jerusalem got everyone else to close down their other Jewish temples, and they said all of Jewish worship and all of Jewish religious decision making, by implication, comes out of the temple in Jerusalem. So we're talking about that phase, not earlier and not later. And but it's very hard to separate the later rabbinic material from the Bible, because, for example, the Seder plate and all of this really comes from the rabbis of the Talmud, and they're going to, right after the destruction of the temple in the year 70, in the 50 years after that, or 70 years after that, they're going to try to reconstruct Judaism, and much of that is going to involve Passover. There's a whole tractate in the Talmud called Pesachim, which is about Passover, and chapter 10 of Pesachim is about the Passover Seder. Yes.
Quick question regarding when the Seder was actually held or celebrated at home, when people actually started to celebrate the Passover Seder at home. When did that
Right.
start?
Very hard for me to say, but clearly, once the temple was destroyed, there was no temple to go to. So that's going to affect people's mentality. Was there a Passover celebrated at home before then? Probably, possibly. Was there synagogue services before the temple was destroyed? To some degree. But there's very little documentation on this, so it's very hard to know how much they observed at home and what they did. But clearly, in the aftermath of the destruction, the rabbis in the Mishnah and the Talmud, so post 70, they're going to set down clear rules to say, since there's no temple anymore, you can't make a pilgrimage, therefore you should make a Seder at home, and therefore you should have prayers in the synagogue. So post 70, we know lots of stuff going on. Before 70, I can guess. So my first answer was kind of the official answer. Now, if I'm going to speculate a little more, I would say, well, in a given community, let's say a little town in the Galilee with 1,000 residents, I don't know what percentage are going to do the pilgrimage. 200, 300, you have to have some money to do it. You have some time available. It's after the crops. So it was put in this place, so it's a relatively easier time, but still people have obligations. The kids have yoga class and ice skating. So 200 out of 1,000 went, maybe 300. So what happened to the other 700 or 800? They stayed home, but they know it's Passover. So there's a little Jewish community center that was called a synagogue, but they didn't necessarily have a Torah in it. They didn't necessarily have regular worship, but they must have gathered there at some point, and they must have celebrated some form of Passover together and say, oh, those lucky people that are in Jerusalem, but here we are, we're going to do our best. And they must have done something at home. But what exactly and how extensive it was, I would imagine that they tried really hard, because, a lot of this is simply based on the situation. There's no cars, there's no cable TV, there's no internet, there's very little theater. So what are they going to do on Passover? They're going to try to celebrate it, but there's nothing in the halacha yet about exactly how to do a Seder at home. But they know, for example, that you're not supposed to eat
leavened bread,
Leavened bread,
and that you are supposed to eat.
matzah.
matzah,
Right. So they do have the ritual items, and they did know about haroset, and they certainly knew about maror, and they certainly knew about eating, food like chicken or turkey or something. So it would seem that there was some sort of a Passover meal at home, and that there was some ritual associated with that. So I'm going to guess that the answer to Steve's question is that for at least 500 years before the destruction temple, the people that didn't go on pilgrimage observed Passover both in their houses and in some communal setting, if they had a synagogue, or if not, in some like common area, or somebody who had a big living room. So I'm going to say, Steve, that there was extensive observance, but it was rougher, and they didn't have a Haggadah, and they kind of made it up as they went along, and it was a lot shorter than it is today, probably, or certainly less defined.
Yeah.
Donna.
Yeah, at that time, was there a question on the food subject of something being kosher or not?
In other words, did they know what was kosher for Passover and what was
Right.
not?
Right.
Well, I guess not to the extent that today, the Orthodox Jews, have everything OU with a little P. And
Right.
there's lists of exactly what and not. But in general terms, yes, they knew for hundreds of years, you eat matzah, you don't eat bread. Therefore, those little, what are those little croutons they put on the salad is bread, and pretzel sticks are bread, and so forth. And matzah meal is not bread. So they knew all of that, and
So
that was enough. And that was
So
enough.
they basically followed the food content that was in Leviticus, right?
Yeah, and
Okay.
and now there was already an oral tradition long before the Talmud was written down. So did that oral tradition go from the rabbis to the people, or did some of it come from the people to the rabbis? So either way, people kind of knew that there were certain minhagim, customs, that were kind of accepted.
And the rabbis took it out of Leviticus, right?
Well, the rabbis took what was in Leviticus and they
Right.
added to it.
Okay. Right.
And
Yeah.
how they added to it, whether they were writing down traditions that were just already widely accepted by the people, or whether they made them up and told the people to do them, that's what I'm asking as a question, but I don't know that answer. It might depend on the thing.
Thank you.
Yes, Minya.
You mentioned that they were familiar with Haroset and Maror and some of the other things.
Well, they certainly were familiar with maror. That you didn't have to be a a famous chef to know. Okay, we're celebrating here the Exodus from Egypt, from the leaving of slavery, and we were embittered in Egypt, and so embittered, you'd want something bitter. So that would be a food that's just logical, right?
So these were foods they ate in their normal lives.
I
Well,
think they had some form of maror that was bitter that they ate, I believe. Yes. Evelyn.
no, I was just saying that there are other bitter roots. Horseradish is one because there's one that we currently cultivate. There must have been others possibly that they may have used in lieu of what we consider, typical Seder fare as such. So all of these things are representational in a sense. The maror, haroset. Again, we make up haroset with apples and nuts and honey. The Moroccans make it up of dates and other fruits. So I guess depending upon the particular culture, the custom evolved, and yet in a way it became selective to that particular culture. So I think this is true today too, that Pesach is celebrated in different ways. Essentially, the principles are the same, but the way we celebrate may be slightly different.
Right. So I agree with Evelyn. Pam, Bernie?
I have a question. Was
Yes.
Pesach always was it always a family celebration, or at one time was it men and women had separate celebrations?
Well, if you went on pilgrimage to Jerusalem, I would think that the whole family would try to go. And then you would bring, if you could, you'd bring a sacrifice for Passover to the temple, and the Kohanim and the Leviim would take it, and they would kill the animal, if it was an animal, and take part of it, they would roast it, take part of it for themselves, burn part of it for God, and give most of it back to you. And then you and your family would then, eat, feast on this for Passover for the week. And it was, not only was it like part of your vacation plans, it was like you're bringing your own all-inclusive, but it's also a way of a ritual, So it was a very family-oriented thing. In the temple itself, there were parts of the temple that were mixed and parts where it was only men and women were separated. But you weren't there that long, maybe a few hours, but you might spend a week in Jerusalem.
Okay.
Bernie, Shirley, Cy. Okay. So we're looking at this today partly from the idea of what does the Torah say about Passover in this particular parsha, and partly from a more theoretical sense is how does Judaism develop? What do we see here about the rudimentary aspects of Passover, and how do we extrapolate from that what was added later? So we can learn about how Judaism developed, if you will. Okay, who wants to start reading?
You want me to?
If you're willing, Evelyn.
Okay, origins of the Pesach celebration. Pesach is one of the most popular celebrations of the Jewish year. On the evening of the 14th day of Nisan, families and friends gather for the Seder. The table is festively decorated with holiday symbols, including the Pesach, Zerah, a roasted shank bone or chicken neck, the matzah, unleavened bread, the maror, bitter herb, and haroset, a mixture of apples, nuts, honey, cinnamon, and wine. The shagiga, betzah, roasted egg, the karpas, parsley, the cups of wine, and 1 cup of wine set aside for Elijah. At each place is a Haggadah, a book containing the Seder or order of the evening service and the story of the Jewish people's liberation from Egypt.
Okay, thank you, Evelyn. So, has he talked yet about the Bible?
No.
No.
No. So what Harvey Fields is describing here is what we do today. And does this look familiar to most of you?
Of course, yeah.
We do.
Except for the chicken neck part.
Yeah, that
That
it's usually
surprises me.
it's usually a shank bone from a lamb.
When I buy a turkey, it comes inside with the turkey neck, I guess, right? You pull it out from inside along with the gravy, and I throw that thing out. But I guess some people cook it. But this is all about today. So he's starting contemporary. Okay, Evelyn, we're in the top of page 30, left-hand column.
Those celebrating the Seder will drink 4 cups of wine, invite a child to recite 4 questions, and read about 4 different children representing 4 attitudes to the Pesach festival. Near the beginning of the banquet, a matzah will be broken, and half of it will be set aside as the afikomen, or dessert. Holding a piece of matzah, sometimes at an open door, the leader of the Seder will say, "Let all who are hungry come and eat." The retelling of the Exodus from Egypt will include songs and discussions and a reminder from the rabbis of the Mishnah, who said, "In every generation, a Jew is to see himself or herself as though he or she were escaping from Egypt." The Haggadah, or Haggadah, also contains the story of 5 famous rabbis who extended their celebration from early evening until the break of dawn the next morning. The festive meal concludes with the words, "L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim," next year in Jerusalem. What modern Jews celebrate as a Seder actually evolved over thousands of years. Each generation added important elements to the ceremony while abandoning others. Within our Torah portion, we find important descriptions of the first Pesach rituals observed by the people of Israel. At springtime in ancient times, before the enslavement of Hebrews in Egypt, shepherds set aside a year-old lamb for each household. At twilight on the 14th day of the month of Nisan, when the moon was full and bright, the lamb was slaughtered. Its blood was smeared on the doorposts of the houses where it would be eaten, and then it was roasted for the festival feast. When the meat was ready, it was eaten with matzah and maror.
Okay, thank you. Stop there. So he spends an awful lot of time telling you about today's Passover, but now we finally get to the Torah portion itself. So what does he say about it? If you have your Tanakh, it is in the book of Exodus, chapter 12. And, we can read from there if you like. So what does it say in this paragraph about the ancient Passover, right? So this was a question which was asked. I tried to answer it, but now Harvey Fields hopefully will give a better answer.
It's much more simplistic than the more elaborate ceremony that we go through. I mean, the blood being smeared on the doorpost was reminiscent of the God commanding that the Hebrews smear the blood of the lamb on the doorpost so that he would pass over that particular doorpost. So that makes sense. And the lamb being eaten, well, with matzah again, the unleavened bread and the maror. So again, you've got a simpler concept there, as it has become so much more elaborate as the centuries have gone by.
Mhm.
Great.
Okay. Donna?
When
And
did
then
they
Sai?
when did they bring the children into the dinner and everything so much? Was it because families were meeting or?
Well, that's a good question as well. I mean, certainly in the Passover Seder, there's an emphasis on involving the children, as you know. And the Manish Tanah, for example, is recited by the children, and many other things are done to show the children. And the whole thing is basically ostensibly for the children, although for the adults as well. When did that start? It probably started before there was an official Seder. But we don't know exactly. Here in this paragraph at least, you're taking a young lamb and you're slaughtering it, and you take the blood and smear it on the doorposts of the house, and then you roast it, and then you eat it with matzah and moror. And this is exactly what was done in the temple, that the animal was sacrificed on Passover, just like this.
And it was
And
done as it was during the leaving of Egypt. So maybe it was done to teach the children what had happened by
it's
celebrating this.
you're doing some interesting speculation. Maybe. Sai?
Well, I think the important thing is to note that it mentions the fact that this whole procedure goes on before they are slaves. That's the part I don't get.
Ah,
They're doing this before they are slaves.
Marcia's not here. So, so when I say something that is counter to orthodoxy, Marcia's eyebrows go up. And so, Evelyn, will you convey to Marcia that I said something that, needs to be kept under wraps?
Okay.
But yes, Sai's making a very, very insightful point that if this was done, if what evidence do we have that this was done as a result of Passover? And the answer is maybe we do and maybe we don't. It may be an observance that was around before the Exodus. Maybe there was no Exodus and that this was simply connected to a theme that was seen as desirable. I mean, there's a lot of ways to speculate. Um, but I think, it's pretty clear that different elements were brought together and they did not necessarily happen in the order that they are presented. Maybe they did, but maybe they didn't. Steve.
Okay, typically though, it's encouraged by the leaders of the family, like the father or whatever, to ask questions. And typically the questions are asked by the children so that they can remember the story and carry it on to their children.
Right. Correct. And so there's a very strong pedagogical element in Passover, maybe more so than the other holidays. But remember, like Sukkot, about waving the lulav and the etrog, this is very colorful and it's must be partially designed to catch the interest of the children as well. Shavuot, where the main thing is staying up all night and studying, maybe less so. But even there, the kids will remember staying up all night, So each holiday clearly has rituals that are at least partly designed to get the interest and the curiosity of children of various ages. Pam.
I keep thinking about the 5 rabbis who stayed up and drank all night.
Ah.
Funny.
Is that what you guys do? Get together?
I don't want to spill too many secrets.
Fair enough.
But yes, they stayed up all night, and then one of the students came and said to them, it's daybreak already. It's time for the morning services, and they were still sitting around the table talking. So talking. Well, it's an obligation, Pam, to drink the 4 cups of wine. I mean, they weren't doing it just for fun.
But
Costly.
those are big goblets, Rabbi, not the small ones like we use now.
Well, that's Steve. They're trying to be strict and to fulfill their obligation to the mitzvot. That's all. Well, but Judaism, at least the popular perceptions, Judaism says where if something is not prohibited for some particular reason, you should enjoy yourself. So why not? If it's in this case, it's not only allowed, it's expected. So do it. and they didn't have to drive, so there's no issue of drunken driving. So they didn't even walk, so now could it have affected the quality of their prayers in the morning? I guess I don't know if any of these guys led the services, so let's hope not. Uh, okay, other comments?
No.
What is this thing about smearing blood on the doorposts?
Well, that's
I
a
mean-
repetition of what was described in Exodus, that God commanded the Hebrews to smear the blood on the doorposts so that he would pass over them and not kill the firstborn.
Ah, so so yeah, society, it brings up questions of what came first. And I'm not gonna even try to answer those questions, but it's very interesting. Okay, Evelyn, you want to keep going a little bit more?
Sure. Early Hebrew farmers also observed a spring festival. Their custom included removing all leavened products from their houses and eating only matzah for 7 days, from the 14th day until the 21st day of the month of Nisan. No one knows when the two traditions of shepherds and farmers were combined. That may have occurred at the time Moses liberated the Jewish people from Egyptian bondage, or later. All accounts of the festival within the Torah link it to the historic moment of the Exodus. For instance, we are told that the lamb is to be called the Pesach sacrifice because God passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when the Egyptians were killed. The Torah also contains instructions about eating the lamb. It is to be eaten quickly while each male stands with a staff in his hand, sandals on his feet, and a girdle around his waist. The dress and dramatic posture are of those escaping danger, fleeing for their lives.
Okay. Stop. Thank
Okay.
you, Evelyn. So what is he saying now? Pam or Bernie or Cy or Minya or Steve?
Well,
No, well, he's describing, he's intimating that people should accept the posture of what happened and therefore imitate it as a reminder of what had gone before.
Okay, and specifically,
Well,
he's arguing something that I've been hinting at for the first half hour. Cy?
I'm looking at something completely different, if you will.
Let me
looking-
stick with my question just for a
Uh,
sec.
No, it's
All
not.
right, good. All right, we'll go to your question. All right, go ahead, Cy.
Bernie,
Go ahead, Cy.
Oh, here we have God, the mighty God, and he's killing off innocent firstborn of Egyptians, number one. And then later on, he kills off a lot of Egyptian innocent when they get drowned in the Red Sea. And I'm wondering, there's a lot of deaths going on here. And why is he doing all of this to innocent people, if you will?
Right. Okay. So you're saying that this holiday has some dark
Yeah, it's not as
undertones.
happy as it really is, except maybe for a handful, relatively speaking, of people.
Okay. Good point. Good point. Bernie, Steve?
okay, I believe the way Harvey is talking about is describing the rituals at that time, and these are the things that you should do in order to celebrate the holiday.
Okay. But how many holidays were there according to Harvey Fields?
Well, two.
Great.
Thank you, Bernie. So Bernie or Steve?
Go ahead, Bernie.
I was just saying two,
And what are the two?
but, well, the farmers and the sheep herders.
Okay, so you have two groups of people with different lifestyles. The shepherds and the farmers. One of them is running around all the time. They pitch a tent like the Bedouin, they move place to place. The other one, they have their fields, so they have to stay exactly where they were. And one has a holiday and the other has a holiday. They're both celebrated at pretty much exactly the same time, but they have slightly different reasonings and practices and little bit different things. And Harvey Fields is suggesting, intonating, I think was Evelyn's word, that these two holidays were late at some point combined. Bernie.
To me, I have to go back to what Cy asked earlier, and it seems that this all happened pre-Exodus. And therefore, I don't understand the reasoning behind introducing matzah.
Uh-huh. So Sai has put the seed of doubt in our minds and is threatening to pull us away from pure religious belief of an Orthodox nature. And Steve, you've got to do something to stop this.
Don't know, Rabbi. That could be a challenge.
I was thinking that too.
I feel a responsibility here, and this is being taped, and I'm going to be blamed.
Well,
And
how can you celebrate Passover until it actually happened? Or at least-
well, yes. So, as I said, Sai is putting these evil thoughts in your head, Steve.
No, no,
Yeah.
I'm gonna stay with what I know.
Um, so apparently there was a certain practices. The shepherds had practices, the farmers had practices. Then there's certain stories about things that happened or might have happened. And then there's rituals such as the matzah. And at some point over a course of probably hundreds of years, all of these things came together, and the rituals and the stories and the and the practices and the calendar, and it all started to form into one thing. And maybe a little bit of it was dropped, but most of it was incorporated into one coherent narrative. And nobody wanted to say, well, this started out as all different types of people celebrating all different types of things. It wasn't one group. Now, Harvey Field says it's two groups, right? But there's no guarantee it was just two groups. It may have been several groups, right? So, maybe there were two groups of farmers that had slightly different practices. So, but eventually it forms into the Passover that we know, first in a rudimentary form, and then maybe 1,000 years later or more into the form that we know. By the year 200 or 500 CE, you pretty much have the Passover practices that Orthodox Jews observe today. Evelyn, Donna, and then whoever else, then Steve or whoever else, Bernie.
Many of these concepts existed before. The concept of matzah, unleavened bread. Most of the Bedouins ate unleavened bread for centuries. This was not a new concept that evolved because the Hebrews didn't have time to leaven their bread. When we were in Israel in 2008, and we went to a Bedouin tent and he demonstrated making unleavened bread. He mixed the wheat flour with the water and immediately put it on a hot iron plate. And immediately he had unleavened bread, which he passed around that we ate. And so this is how they made bread. They didn't, when they were so-called on the road, they didn't bother with leavened bread. They just made it instantaneously. So again, this was something that existed before. It's not something new. So when the Hebrews left in a hurry, this was a pattern that was already established anyway.
Yes, agreed, 100% agree.
That
Yes.
must have been a branch of Panera Bread.
Uh-huh.
Donna.
Okay, who was next?
Donna.
Donna, and then Bernie, and
Bernie.
then Steve, or whoever else wants to.
Just as far as how they were when they were celebrating, is that I believe that when they came out of Egypt and they were in the land where God took them, every year I think that they remembered this. If things were not easy there, and so some of them were saying to God, "Hey, why did you bring us out? It was better there." So they did remember the time of coming out, and I think that grew. Someday I'll tell you a story of my wonderful Jewish husband and our first Pesach in Israel, when he decided he was not going to give up bread. So he went to McDonald's. And that was an interesting scenario. So one of these days I'll tell you that. I didn't, by the way. I had salad and chips.
Ah,
Bernie.
The statement of in the Seder of Lashon Haba B'Yerushalayim strikes me as odd. On the surface, it sounds good. We should all be in Jerusalem next year. But since the temple was destroyed, the pilgrimage are over. So the only thing that I can rationalize for this is that we're asking for the temple to be rebuilt by next year.
Correct. So this has to be from after the temple's not there anymore. So we're praying next year in Jerusalem, meaning next year in the temple, because there is no this year in the temple, because there is no temple. So that part was added after 70 CE for sure. Okay, other comments? Okay, Evelyn, you want to keep reading?
Sure. This early ceremony was known as Seder Mitzrayim, or the Seder of Egypt, because it records the early history and rituals of Pesach. The rabbis named this celebration that evolved over the centuries Seder Derot, or the Seder of the Generations. Seder Derot includes many of the old traditions, though they have been changed to meet new circumstances.
Okay, stop right there. So, so Seder Mitzrayim, or the Seder of Egypt, is considered the original form. And then the rabbis are kind of saying when they say the Seder of Dorot, or Seder of the Generations, that what they do is they add newer texts to the older texts. And that's why in the Passover Seder, you have a variety of different texts, which appear to be in some ways incongruous to one to the other. So you have older things from the Bible, you have things from the Talmud or from other rabbinic sources, you even have stuff from medieval times. So what was done is new stuff was added on top of the old stuff, not to replace the old stuff, but on top of it. And so that's what makes one of the things that makes the Haggadah so interesting is that you're dealing with different layers, like an archaeological dig, and you can go back But the older stuff, was it added first? Maybe, maybe not. Just because it's older doesn't mean it was put in first. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. So there's a lot of different texts from different layers. Comments? Yes.
When
Pam,
did they stop adding layers?
when did they stop?
Yeah.
Well, modern Haggadahs continue to do that. The Haggadah we've been using the last couple years is mostly new, but not entirely. So they added all these songs sung to these American folk songs, and they added there's and they don't do it as much anymore, but 20 years ago they would they have many Haggadahs. There'd be a civil rights Haggadah and a feminist Haggadah and a Haggadah for left-handed people, and there was dozens and dozens. There was Haggadah from a politically far left point of view. There was, if you're not Orthodox, you can make your new Haggadah. If you are, you believe that you have to do exactly what the rabbi said, and you can't subtract. I guess you could add a little bit, but they don't really encourage that. Evelyn.
I remember as a youngster being aware of families that were very poor. They only had one set of dishes and cutlery. Therefore, they couldn't do what we consider, the Orthodox consider critical in today's Passover service, to completely eliminate or get rid of and store away your regular dishes and use just only Passover dishes and cutlery and cookware and everything else. And it seems to me that it was from the Depression, the early 1930s, that things began to become much more elaborate and rituals, what you may have and what you may not have, and the fact that your sour cream has to have a hechsher on it with a special stamp, otherwise it's no good. I don't think things were quite as elaborate in this country, even before World War II, or the Depression, I should say. I think all of these things have become almost nonsensical, to be perfectly honest, in my own opinion, that the strictures become so strictured and tight that it almost defeats the purpose of the holiday. And this, as far as orthodoxy is concerned, at any rate, or even conservatism for that matter. And culture changes. And so as the culture changes and economic conditions change, I think the Haggadahs and the ritual and what is required changes as well. If, God forbid, we were involved in a war and some things that were required are no longer available, what would happen? We might not be able to get matzah. We might not be able to obtain the foods that were expected and required. What do people do under those circumstances?
You do the best you can. I mean, I had a Orthodox roommate one year in college, and his father was Orthodox from Maryland, and his father was in World War II, and the only meat they had was spam, so he ate it.
Yeah.
Otherwise you'd not have. Oh, there's Marcia.
Yeah.
Marcia came late today because she didn't want to hear the information that might pull her away from her steadfast belief in traditional Judaism and the God of Israel. And so she knew exactly when to come in. And so,
I got
Marcia,
a new water heater.
Yeah.
you have to promise not to watch the tape of the first 45 minutes, which will undermine your faith.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so we have to be on our best behavior, Sai.
So I've been going, being the renegade here, And for the club, the
Mm,
group.
No, he was just asking too many questions, not just
Can
Cy.
never
There's-
ask too many questions.
All right, well, if you'd heard it, your eyebrows would have gone up and you would have said, that's too much.
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't go into that.
We don't want to put
Anyway,
you out of
well,
business either.
Yeah,
what?
We don't want to put you out of business.
no,
Yes, well, yes, other comments? Okay, Evelyn, back to you.
Okay, for instance, this is the right column at the bottom. For instance, emphasis
page
is
30.
still placed upon the festive family meal and upon the importance of eating matzah for 7 days. Maror is still eaten as a reminder of the bitterness of slavery. All that is left of the Pesach lamb, however, is a roasted shank bone placed on the Seder plate and at the appropriate moment in the ceremony, held up by the leader, who explains that it is a reminder of God saving the Israelite firstborn on the night of when all of the Egyptian firstborn were killed.
Okay, thank you, Evelyn. So explain this, Pam. What happened to the lamb?
Yeah,
I
good-
love lamb.
Good question. The lamb is sacrificed.
Yes, but part of it was sacrificed, but a lot of it was eaten. But why are we not eating it anymore? What do we do? What do we do today?
I don't know.
Brisket.
That's a good question. Well, we still do our, we still do the shank bone as a representative of the lamb.
Yeah, so it's now just been reduced to a symbol. Before it was a real thing.
Yeah,
And in Georgia, one year they bought these enormous shank bones that must have come from a dinosaur. They must have been 4 feet long. And they had this huge freezer. And so they pull the shank bones out of the freezer, use them for the seders, and then drop them back in the freezer for the next year.
Right.
So, which is fine, but I wouldn't want to eat them about 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be good. Yes, Marcia.
It's very hard to get shank bones now, and I did the same thing. When I got a bone like that, I freeze it and then stick it in the oven, right before Passover to get it looking nice and crunchy. And one year I had Passover Seder with, and I at Shelley and Barbara Moss's house, and I at the end of the meal, and they were cleaning up, and I said, "What happened to my shank bone?" And I guess I called back that I didn't have my shank bone, and he threw it out, and I was so upset because
Yeah.
now I had to go find another shank bone.
Oh, he didn't ask you first what to do with it?
No. I was so, because it's really hard to get a decent shank.
Right. No, of course, with something like that, you would always ask the person, for that very reason,
Oh, it
everybody
looked so
knows.
ugly. I think he thought it was just a disreputable looking bone.
Well, but you're not eating it. You're just, but in the old days, you would eat it. There'd be a whole lamb and you would eat it, and then you'd cut off the bones and, use that for any ritual. But it was a much more of a organic part of the service. And I guess that the change is because there's no temple. So there's no way to sacrifice the lamb. And so since there's no sacrifice, the meat that results from it is not going to be sanctified meat. So there's really no point in doing it. The bone is just a symbol. It's not real in a sense. Whereas before, this was, something that actually was was done as part of a ritual. The whole thing was a ritual. Now the Seder plate becomes a ritual, but what's on the Seder plate are just symbols. I mean, symbols are important, right? Symbols represent things, but before it had a certain physicality, actuality. The full lamb was an important part. and now no.
Well, there's an Orthodox deli in Phoenix where you can get an official shank bones and all that.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And are they 4 or 5 feet long?
No.
Steve?
Butcher Bob's also offers shank bones too, if you want it.
Oh, good to know.
And that's rabbinically sanctioned?
Yeah, don't think so.
But they used
Uh,
to give them away at the grocery stores.
Yeah, because they had no use.
Now
for
they
them.
charge you to also,
Oh, yeah.
they
That's right.
have them.
Yes.
Oh, man. Well, life is nothing's free in life today. Let's read the box. Evelyn, if you're still willing,
Sure. Each
according to his or her ability.
The rabbis point out that 4 times the Torah mentions the questions that children will ask on the evening of Pesach. 3 of the questions are found in the Torah portion, Exodus 12:26, etc. And 1 is found in Deuteronomy. One explanation of the 4 different questions is that they represent 4 different kinds of human abilities to listen and to learn. When God spoke to Israel, the rabbis teach, each person heard according to his or her ability. The elders, the children, the babies, the young, even Moses, each understood what God was saying according to his or her capacity to listen. The difference between the wicked child and the wise child. The wise child asks, "What do the laws and traditions that God has commanded you mean?" The wicked child asks, "What does this ritual service mean to you?" What is the difference between them? It has been suggested that the wise children ask the reason for the various types of rituals, while the wicked children do not care about the meanings of the ceremony. For them, the festival is merely a burden God has imposed upon the Jewish people year after year. My comment at this particular point is that when he says each understood what God was saying according to his or her capacity to listen, people hear what they want to hear or expect to hear. And so this is why you get different interpretations of the same sentence or edict or proclamation, because we each hear it according to our own needs, requirements, or what we expect to hear. And so this is why you get such a tremendous variation in that.
And then what about the wise children and the wicked children?
Well, a wise child wants to know why, whereas the wicked children really don't care about the ceremony, in the sense it's just something that you're making them, it's a burden for them. It's something that you're making them suffer through as far as they're concerned. So
So using the word wicked is a little harsh.
I think wicked is not probably a proper word to use. Maybe its intent was different when the Haggadahs first came out, but to imply that a child is wicked is perhaps, as you say, a very harsh and not what we would call a good psychological approach to the problem.
All right. Steve, comment, wicked versus wise. Were you the wise son when you were growing up?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's his story, sticking
Absolutely.
to it.
Okay, keep going, Evelyn.
Okay. Homo Leibowitz points out that the real difference between the wise and wicked children is not in their words, but in the introductions to their questions within the Haggadah. We are told that the wise child will ask you, and that the wicked child will say to you, it is the attitude of each that makes the difference. So long as a child asks, no matter how difficult the questions are, it is a sign that he expects an answer. He is far from being malicious, but is a student, thirsty for knowledge. The wicked one, however, does not ask and desires no reply. His attitude is fixed and predetermined. He is not interested in your answer, but only in what he will say to you.
All right, so you have, I mean, I've had people come to me and say that their grandchildren are supporting Hamas. So, and not that they're, did a study and they think maybe Hamas has a point. They're just supporting Hamas because their friends at universities support Hamas. So they come to the grandparents and they say, I'm supporting Hamas. They don't say, explain to me this thing because this looks complicated and some of my friends say that the Hamas are right and Israel is wrong or whatever. They just say, we support Hamas. So this is kind of like that, like a wise, so maybe the word wicked is not too harsh, that the wise child asks questions with a rational framework, like, explain it to me. I want to ask tough questions. And I want you to give me good answers. The wicked child is already brainwashed somewhere and comes and just tells you, I reject everything you stand for and I want to kill you, basically, or I support the people that want to kill you. So I don't know, maybe under those circumstances, it wouldn't be too extreme. Yes, Pam.
Well, to me, it's not so much the wicked child as the ignorant child. Because to me, wicked makes it sound, that they're, having, they're angry issues. But to me, it's more of they don't know yet what to ask.
But they're not open to dialogue. They say you're wrong and you're bad. They're accusing you of all sorts of stuff, and they're not even open to discuss it. So, all right, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Bernie and then Evelyn.
Back in the day, when I used to have to go through the Haggadah, it seemed to me that the so-called wicked child was one who was just disassociating himself from the group. He was saying, what does all this mean to you? Whereas the wise child would have said, what does all this mean to us?
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I was going to say that his attitude is fixed and predetermined. There's another way of phrasing it. Don't confuse me with the facts. My mind is already made up. So
Yes.
I mean, that's a more simplistic way of putting it, but it makes sense, and
Exactly. That's very true. Okay. Did we read the Nechama Leibowitz part? Yes, okay. Okay.
At top of page 31.
Yes, the very end. We're up to the end.
Okay. At the Seder, Jewish fathers no longer dress as if they were about to leave on a long journey, but the Haggadah created by the rabbis does include 4 questions to be asked by children at the festive meal. There is also a section about 4 types of children, each representing different attitudes and learning abilities. The emphasis of the Seder remains the same as it was in ancient times. It is a unique banquet in which Jews are to relive the historic experience of being liberated from Egyptian oppression and are to pass on that story from generation to generation. Isn't that essentially the purpose of the Seder?
Well, it's one of the purposes, clearly.
Of the Haggadah, I should say, is, to keep reminding them year after year so that hopefully by the time they're adults, it sinks in and they can perpetuate it.
How much of this in the Bible at least, is saying that Passover is a family holiday with unique family dynamics, and how much of it is that this is a national holiday where you're supposed to celebrate the national aspect. Pam.
I say it's mainly a family holiday.
Uh-huh. So each family might interpret the Passover Seder in the way they want. And what's important at the Seder is how people interact with one another on a personal level. And okay, interesting. Evelyn, Sai, and Marcia in that order.
Question in terms of, it is the leader who leads the Seder. Does that mean it does not necessarily have to be the father? Could it be a grandfather, an uncle, a relative, or someone more familiar with the ceremony involved that would be leading it? When they say leader, does it have to be the father?
No. I mean, it could be the grandfather. It could, in traditional world, and if there's no grandfather or father, then there would be some other male. But the
Why can't it be-
traditional,
Why can't it be the mother?
well, in the traditional world, it wasn't. In today's world, it certainly, of course. So it depends what you're talking about. But in the old style, it would be expected to be a male under most circumstances, I would think. But there's nothing halachic requiring that. But a traditional Judaism was quite patriarchal, as you know. Okay, who is next? Is
Sai.
Sai.
Sai and then Marshall?
I would like to think that it's always been a family celebration. And of course, a family celebration in terms of remembering the Passover, the slavery, and so forth and so on. But now, particularly in Israel, I think it's a national holiday, and that's a good thing. Just like our 4th of July is a national holiday for us. I think that it's important that Israel have as many national holidays as they possibly can, and this is an important one for them.
Well, they definitely do, and a lot of the national holidays in Israel today deal with the creation and maintenance of the state of Israel, the Yom Ha'atzmaut, Yom HaZikaron, Yom Yerushalayim, and so forth. Marcia.
Did we discuss when I wasn't on just the importance of the Passover holiday as a family tradition at all?
Well, we skirted by that a few times, but go ahead.
Well, I think there you go. That it's in a Jewish household, it is an important part of the year, an important time. Everybody knows they're getting together for Passover if they possibly can. It brings a sense of unity, of a sense of connection to Judaism, I think, when you celebrate Passover, and then that makes it so important.
Okay. And
I don't know. I'm assuming you were throwing Passover out the window and all when I wasn't here,
we were, but now that you're here, we're moving back in the
Get
other
back in
direction.
line, okay.
You've had a very meritorious impact on our entire group just in a
I'm
few
so
minutes.
happy. Okay,
You've saved Judaism, really, Marcia.
very nice.
Okay, Steve.
Okay, from what I understand, it is probably the most celebrated Jewish holiday amongst families, as opposed, and besides Hanukkah. But I would think that Passover was more celebrated than Hanukkah.
It
It's
used,
more of a sit-down, get-together holiday and more than
Absolutely,
Hanukkah.
yes.
Hanukkah sort of, catch can.
Right. So Hanukkah's more of a just stand in front of the window and light the candles for 2 minutes.
Right.
Passover is more of a commitment. You got to sit down and eat and stay. And
Gotta make matzo balls.
matzo
Right.
balls and wine.
Well, and there's a whole process. You don't just, it just don't show up to the Seder. You have to clean the house,
Right.
and there's a whole ritual for that. This is a ritual thing. You take the feather and you deliberately put down a couple of breadcrumbs, and you sweep the breadcrumbs into the
Yes.
into the the dustpan with this feather, and you burn them. So, I mean, and Passover cleaning can take weeks, right? Yes, Bernie.
I have a story to tell about the burning of the chametz. My grandmother, when she was widowed, was burning the chametz in the backyard.
Uh-oh.
And her neighbor, who was some hillbilly, asked her what she was doing. So she responded, I'm burning some old love letters, and telling us, well, how am I going to explain to her what I'm doing?
That's good.
Good point. I love it. That's
Oh, they're
good.
probably still talking about that. No, good.
Interesting. Other comments, questions, responses?
So I had his hand up briefly, I know. I saw it.
Okay, Steve, Cy, Steve, and then Cy.
Okay, well, I can remember when my brother, my middle brother, was being over. Anyway, when they were talking about Elijah, he would shake the table so that the cup would, kind of move. But he shook it a little too hard, and oh my God, the wine was all over the place, and the white linen tablecloths, and my mother was extremely upset.
Elijah got violent.
Yeah.
That's because I've
Yes.
got to tell my story too.
Okay.
Um, my husband would take the Elijah cup when the kids weren't looking and dump the wine into his cup. So eventually, little by little, Elijah's cup was really low or empty, So when they got to be teenagers, I think they had the three older ones who were very close in age, got together and they were keeping an eye, they took turns keeping an eye on him. And that one of them caught him doing this, so he got called on it, and, and so, or Elijah's story, the thing about Elijah coming in the door, it was kind of funny because they were so amazed over the years when they were little, and how did that happen? Elijah must have been here, so.
Shirley.
I'll tell my story then. My mother and dad used to have our Seder at our house for years and years. And finally, one year, a cousin and his new wife decided to have it at their house. They had a son who was about 15, and she told him we were having a Seder tonight. You can come if you want to, but if you don't, just stay in your bedroom and tell your friends they can't come over. So he said, okay. So we have a Seder, and my niece was about 4 or 5 maybe. And as it was her turn to open the door for Elijah. And so she goes bopping up to the door to open it for Elijah. And she comes back white as a sheet. She says, he's here. He's here. And we said, so Naomi, no, he's not here yet. It's too early for him. No, he's here. Come and see. Come and see. And we go running to the door. And here's this kid, probably about 18 or 20, has on shorts and sandals, long hair, blonde, bleached blonde. I mean, if you were 4 or 5 years old, wouldn't you think that was Elijah?
Yes.
He was a
absolutely.
friend. Was a friend of the kid who didn't come to the Seder.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
This poor child was so scared. She
Yeah.
she couldn't.
That is so funny.
So how many weeks did it take for her to get over that?
She got over by the time she had to steal the Vatakoman.
Oh, okay, yes. Well, she has priorities.
Yeah.
Now the whole Seder is based on a Roman symposium. So the Romans had these elaborate dinners that had dramatic aspects to them, kind of a dinner theater kind of environment. And by the time the rabbis made this, Seder that we know it, they were familiar with what the Romans were doing, and so they copied the concept.
Yeah.
Evelyn.
You just reminded me that there's always a cushion in the chair.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Recline. And the reason we're supposed to recline is the nobility in the Roman Empire reclined on the couches when they ate. And so that was a symbol of being noble or being important. And that's why the cushions are there, so we can supposedly
And
recline.
who did not recline on a comfortable cushion were slaves.
Yeah.
So it's so yes, and then you know, and some of the songs sung at the end of the Haggadah are like bar songs. You know, they're very similar to the 99 beers of bottles of beer on the wall, but it's the cat that ate the mouse that and so you can see that the rabbis were playing into things that people knew that they would like.
Is it-
Marcia.
No, it went out of my head what I was going to say because I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Isn't
Steve, is that a hand?
No,
Ev-
I'm petting my dog.
Okay.
You're
Me
petting
too.
your dog.
Evelyn.
You're happy.
Isn't that true of just typical human behavior of every religion as it is being formed? I'm thinking of the Christian religion. Why did they have Jesus born during the winter solstice? Because the pagans themselves celebrated that particular holiday. In order to make it more palatable for the general populace, they incorporated holidays that were typical and common to make it much more sense to the masses, say. And so I assume that this all happened in a comparable fashion, that these are how many of our customs did evolve from simplistic one culture and another culture, and eventually being combined, and they eventually became common knowledge per se. This is how human behavior evolves over a long period of time, and we think in terms of years, but really human behavior encompasses thousands and thousands of years. And so, well, that's how things change in today's society with the rapid communication we have, internet and other means of communication. Human behavior changes much more rapidly than it did centuries and centuries ago, because information is disseminated much more rapidly. And so this is, we get these immediate changes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very true. Final thoughts? Did we learn anything today, or has this all been stuff that you already knew?
To me, it was something I already know.
Well, we already know
Well-
it, but the nice part is that it gives us an opportunity to think about it and hear other people's thoughts, so.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay, so it's not, the point of this kind of a thing is not to provide us with all that much new information, but to
No.
provide it in an accessible way that we can
Yeah.
read
Right.
it, discuss it, and hear from other people and integrate it, so it's okay, that's Harvey Field's strength for sure.
Well, you said it better than I did, but yes.
Concluding thoughts, anyone? Marcia?
No, we're heading into Passover pretty
Yeah,
soon
pretty
now.
quickly.
Passover's important.
Yes, I think it is. I think it is as I said before, I think it's a central part of Judaism.
Could you have Judaism without the Exodus from Egypt story?
Mm,
I don't know. I never
Interesting.
thought about it that way.
Interesting. Hmm.
We have to figure out a different way to get the Torah.
Yeah.
Well, the Torah is at
Yeah.
Mount Sinai. You could just start the story with the Jews were told to go to a mountain and get the Torah.
But it's an interesting what if.
It's a dramatic presentation, definitely.
The
Yeah.
story of the Exodus is dramatic, so
Oh,
it's
yeah,
kind of nice.
sure. We've got all those people walking out and, and
Yeah.
Charlton Heston and the whole thing, it's
And you
very,
like the 10 plagues? Is that, I mean, it's a horrible thing, but you feel that adds drama.
yeah, it adds a lot of drama to the whole thing.
It's a unifying factor in a way,
Yes.
because you are beginning to coalesce into a religion, which I don't think was coalesced at all at that particular point. And it took many, many years after that for the Hebrews to become Israelites as such. And so, yeah, I think it's an important part of Judaism. Without it, something serious would be lacking.
Okay. Marcia?
That's a good, what you're saying is right, but you needed something to bring peace. There's always has to be something dramatic happening, some earth-shaking thing, something that brings people together, whether it's in local politics or whatever, to make a cause become a fait accompli, a solidified idea. So I think this solidified the idea of the Jewish people, definitely. And if it hadn't been such a dramatic thing with the Pharaoh and the plagues and the whole thing, of bringing us to the point of the Exodus, I think many years might have gone by before something else happened, before a coalescing. Whoever had the idea, I don't know what the discussion was before, I'm afraid to know. But whoever wrote the story of Passover was very wise in putting in such a dramatic happening to bring us together. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was a youngster and we didn't have too many books in the house and I was too young to go to the library on my own, but we had a copy of the Bible. And for some reason, I loved reading about the Exodus. Genesis 2, not quite as much, but something about the Exodus just really appealed to me. What a wonderful story it was, whether it was true or not. There was so much drama, there was so much going on. And so bells and whistles and lightning and everything else. And so it's very appealing to human nature. And as I said before, I think it is the kind of story that gathers people together and makes them feel as if they are part of this particular unit of humanity as such.
And there's I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Steve and then Marcia.
Well, I also think it's important to invite, if you're holding a Seder, invite non-Jewish friends
We
or
did.
family, to educate them about the history of the Exodus. It's to me, it's very, very important to let them understand what we observe.
Who was next?
Okay.
Marcia.
No, that's true. Oh, I understand. No, never mind.
Si, do you have any?
I know what I was going to
wisdom?
say. I
Go
remember
ahead,
what I was going to say.
Marcia.
What's interesting with Passover, it makes sure that the kids are involved with the afikomen and etc. And it makes it a holiday that eventually the children can enjoy after sitting there through. And then the other thing is, it becomes a personal family thing, because each family gets into a routine of reading the Haggadah. I don't know if your family read every page and every, there's that whole rabbi section.
We did.
I went to one Passover Seder from my Havara in California, and the guy read the whole thing. And I said, oh my God, in my head, I'll have to go read through every little portion, you get to be, what the dad or the grandpa is going to elect to read during that service, and it becomes that itself is a family tradition, you know, and how you present a Seder becomes a family tradition. And the kids want to have it a certain way, but they never want to waver because that's how we always did it, you know? So it becomes a real family traditional event of the year.
Minya?
I was just thinking my sister-in-law's family would do the whole book
Oh
and
my
they would
God.
have everybody sitting there till like midnight and first sitting down to eat. And
Ah.
my mother-in-law finally at some point said, you know, I've had enough of this. 4 hours is too long. Call me when you're eating. When she got up and left.
4
I
hours?
guess if you're
Oh,
gonna
We're out.
have,
you read
if you're gonna
everything?
have a long Seder like that, everybody has to be Orthodox and expect it, or it has to be by mutual agreement. So if the 9 of us were having a Seder together, we would have to discuss that in advance. And I would say, if you were having me lead it, how much time can I do? And if everyone says, well, you have 4 hours, or when we want you to do everything, regardless how long it says, I would get you all to sign in writing that you wanted that, so you couldn't say later that it wasn't true. And then, but you can't just do that without people's consent, because
Oh, he
most
did.
people, most people today have very short attention spans in general.
Well,
So
they're
do you think,
Orthodox.
and do you think that
That says it all.
that it makes it harder because people don't identify with the substance of the Passover Seder, or they like the substance, they just want it done in a short, entertaining manner?
I personally
Covers
would think
enough.
that they want it shorter to keep people interested.
Right.
And most people, if they hear it's going to be held that many hours, would say not what?
Not come.
They would say they're not going to come.
Right?
Right.
One other thing about them, because they are Orthodox, they had kitchen counters built just for Passover. So
Really?
that when it was time for Pesach, they brought these up from the basement and they put them on top of the counters so that they didn't have to do anything with the ones that are underneath. Those are the everyday ones. And these were specifically the countertops for Pesach. And they even changed the baskets in the dishwasher. So
Oh,
they
my.
Oh my God.
Pesach dishes.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot from them.
Unfortunately.
Well, things I know I would never do.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Any other final comments? If not, we'll turn it back over to Steve. And happy Passover, everyone.
We got a
If you
couple
want,
minutes, Rabbi. We
if
have a
you
couple
want, I
minutes
can,
before we start.
I'm available to run a Seder 4 hours minimum. If, as long as you give me unlimited supply of chocolate covered matzahs to eat while we're doing the Seder.
Yeah, and we can't forget the wine.
Right.
Okay,
Well,
over to you, Steve.
Okay, one announcement. I hope everyone is going to, unless you've already heard Steve Katz's presentation. I understand it's supposed to be very,
Sun-
very
this
interesting.
Sunday?
And it's about the actors and television in the early 50s and 60s. So should be quite interesting. I know some people have already heard him, but I think it would be quite interesting anyway.
He runs a
Sunday
fun,
at 2
fun
o'clock.
class. He makes it fun.
Sunday at 2 o'clock at the temple. Let's conclude then with this blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natananu Torah emet chayei olam v'tah b'tokeinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Blessed is Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who has given us a teaching of truth
and planting within us eternal life.
Blessed
Blessed
is
is
Adonai,
Adonai, giver
giver
of
of
the
the
Torah.
Torah. Amen.
Man.
everyone, have a good rest of the week.
Thank you.
And we'll
That's fine.
see you next week, if not sooner.
Yep.
Take
Bye.
care, everyone.
God
So
Uh,
Pam,
willing.
wait,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes,
did Dave or anybody decide on what time it is Sunday night?
yes, he did, and I can't remember what it was. I think it was like 7:30.
7?
7 or 7:30?
Yeah,
So that he's gonna send out an email?
I will ask that
Are you gonna
question.
send out an email? You have all the names.
Yeah, I will ask
I
him.
know
that
Bonnie
question.
does.
Yeah, I couldn't find, and then I kept getting these weird pieces of email that said 6 to 7 PM, and I didn't know where this was even coming from. Siri decided that that's what it was, on my Apple thing.
Okay,
So, and I knew it wasn't right. So, and I was trying to get it because Brenda and I couldn't find it. We went through everything. So could you
Okay.
please let us know, okay?
yes, I think
Yeah.
somebody is sending it out to everybody, but I don't know who.
Okay.
Probably Bonnie.
All right. So
Okay.
also throw Joyce Gold. I talked to Steve earlier. Throw Joyce Gold's name into the mix. She's been running that grief group for years now with Mary Gill. Mary Gill can't get the award because she was president for a
Right.
Right,
term there.
yeah.
Like 1.5 years she was president. Yeah.
Have you,
Right.
have you heard how Mary Gill's feeling?
Yeah. Her family wants her to move into an independent, I don't think she'll make independent, but an assisted living, and she doesn't want to go. She's all right, but she does that sundown effect thing,
Mm.
and she's not supposed to drive at this point.
Right.
Makes it difficult. So Brenda talked to her yesterday and she said, she told her, I don't want to go to a home, one of those homes. She said, well, then you have to get live-in help. And
Yeah,
she can well afford it. It's not a problem with her.
right, live-in help would be good. That way
Yeah.
she can
and
stay in the home and
Everybody's been
need help.
telling her that for weeks now, and she
Yeah.
just is fighting it. She wants her privacy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I
Yeah.
know.
Well, I hope the
Alright.
best for her.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, sorry,
Let us know,
guys.
Pam, when the
All right,
meeting
so-
is, and we'll, or whomever is,
Yeah, and I'm gonna be
organizing
there
it.
Sunday.
and we'll be there Sunday.
Yeah, me too. Okay.
All right?
All right, bye-bye.
Steve, did you just
Yes.
record this conversation?
Yes, ma'am.
Not this part.
Yeah.
It wasn't
It's
good.
okay. It's okay.
Why is it okay?
Because by the time people hear it, the meeting will be already, over, so.
I thought you had stopped it or I wouldn't have said anything.
No, I apologize. But I'm stopping it now.
Thanks, Guy.
I don't